see you guys learning here. Excellent. Welcome to our parent university today. We are so excited that you're here and that you're able to join us to talk about the DCPS journey to becoming a whole child center anti-racist district. I will make a quick announcement in Spanish for interpretation services. Si usted necesita servicios de interpretación, están disponibles en bit.ly/DCPS Español. También lo vamos a poner como anuncio en el chat. Again, I just want to introduce myself real quickly. My name is Demelsa Gonzalez Flores. I'm the Family Engagement Specialist here at DCPS. I'll just remove my mask so you can see my face. Hi. Great, so we're really excited about today's session, but I want to go through a couple of housekeeping items to make sure that everyone's experience is great. So first, if you need subtitles for this presentation, they are available in several languages. Just click the gear item icon at the bottom of your screen, select captions, and then select your preferred language. We also have, as I mentioned, the interpretation in Spanish. Oops. This session will be much better with your questions, and we're eager to hear from you. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask questions, share any insights that you might have, or to respond or upvote questions or comments by using like a thumbs up. We are really excited for the questions that were submitted ahead of time through Eventbrite, but we also want to hear about your questions during the session as they come in. I also want to cover a couple of community agreement items that we have. Please assume best intentions. We believe that parents are experts in their children, and we're here as partners with you. And we appreciate that you assume the best intentions from all of our team. Please go hard on ideas, not on people. We want to hear your thoughts and feedback. And please accept non-closure. So there might be a lot of questions that might come up or content that you might have more questions about. This is not the end all be all of this conversation. This is the beginning of it. So we're really excited to share with you, but please accept non-closure. All right, so those were my housekeeping items. And now I'm really excited to introduce you to your facilitators. With us, we have Mike Lamb and Paige Hoffman, and they will introduce themselves. Mike, do you want to go ahead first?
Wonderful. Thank you, Demelsa. And my name is Mike Lamb. I'm our Deputy Chief of the Division of Learning and Development Sciences. And we were just talking earlier about our backgrounds, and I was a former middle school teacher on the south side of Chicago. And I'm really excited to talk with all of you tonight. So Paige, kick it to you.
Thank you, Mike, and hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Paige Hoffman. I'm our Deputy Chief of School Improvement. My division's really excited to work with communities and schools to ensure that all of our students have an amazing school to attend. If we go to the next slide, we wanted to start just by taking a moment to say thank you to each and every one of you. I am a native Washingtonian, and I remember so frequently having the opportunity to join sessions like this with my mom, and I also know that there's a lot that folks are juggling. Unprecedented is a word that has been overused to describe the past year and a half, and so I just wanted to say thank you all for showing up tonight and for engaging in this conversation with us. We're excited to share some of the things that we've been working on and to answer the questions that you might have about the district that we are becoming. With that, we have 3 goals for this evening. The first is to develop and share some common language on our approach to educating the whole child and equity. We're also excited to contextualize some of the progress we've made over the past decade and highlight the untapped potential and why we're really excited about this next phase of greatness for the district. And lastly, but most importantly, we're excited to use this opportunity to include parent voice. This is one of many opportunities I want to name on the front end where we'll be asking for your feedback and engaging in a constructive conversation. But we're excited for this time today and look forward to using the chat features with you all to elevate questions or hear your different comments and feedback.
All right, so now that we've laid the table for our session tonight, we want to start off, as we often do at DCPS, with a social emotional learning opener. And this one hopefully will help you reflect back on your own journey as a learner. And we like to talk about our SEL competencies of self-awareness and social awareness here to reflect on our own position as a learner and the context that we were learning in as well. So remember back many years ago, or it might be very recently for some of you, to think back to your own experience in school growing up. Think about what school you went to, where it was, what people were influential in your life, and ultimately think about what grade did you experience the most joy and fun in school. Think about whether there was one year that particularly made things really fun, that made things really enjoyable, where you really looked forward to coming to school. And then think about whether there was a teacher in your learning experience as well that you had the strongest relationship with. Someone that you knew that if you were struggling, you could reach out to them, you could always count on them for their support, and you felt like they were a predictable adult in your life. Think about what made that relationship so strong. Was there something about the way that they interacted with you? Was there something about the feeling that you had when you walked into their classroom, the way that they greeted you? What made that relationship really, really strong? And then think back a little bit differently, but very relatedly, as we'll talk about tonight. What grade did you learn the most in school? What was the context around you that year? Meaning, what were the relationships that you had that year in school? Was it the same teacher that you just thought about? Was it the same grade or year that you identified earlier? What we'll get into tonight is that the science of learning and development, essentially what explains how children learn and how they develop, tells us that all these things are really interconnected together. That when we feel like we are part of a safe and supportive environment, where we are seen, known, and heard, our whole child is seen, known, and heard, then the parts of our brain that are in charge of learning and memory are wide open for learning and development. And so these aren't necessarily things that are coincidences when you have a great, strong relationship with a teacher and the year that you learn the most. These are part of the same concept. So hopefully you got to think back to an amazing person in your life, someone who provided a wonderful learning experience for you. And that's going to launch us in our portion today that really gets into the science of learning and development and our whole child work. So as we think about the key concepts that we ground in here, there's one main idea that we are really focusing on when you think about the science of learning and development. And that is that skills exist in a potential state within all children. That this is something that is true across the board. That skills are things that someone on my team tells me, reminds me that we possess our own potential already. It's not something that we buy or we go eat or we go get from someone else. We have that potential inside us, and the experience and the context that we are around activates that potential inside us. And so it's really important that we start off with this idea that skills exist in the potential state in all children, and they are just waiting to have that potential activated and realized by the learning context that they're in. And so that context that science tells us, the environment, the experiences, and the relationships around us drives our biology. and the actual expression of our genes, and thus our ability to reach our full potential. So this means that the learning context that you're in actually can help decide what potential inside you gets activated. So this is where our experiences and the potential that we have inside us really work in concert with each other. And so the question for us then becomes, what greets a child on the other side of that school door once they come into one of our amazing school buildings? What is the learning context and the learning environment that will greet them on the other side of that door? Is it a place that is nurturing and welcoming, where they feel like they will have a sense of belonging, where they'll feel included? They will experience lots of trust-building interactions with adults and peers. Will this be a place that ultimately they can feel safe to take risks and flourish? Or will this be a place where they experience a lot of stress and they feel like they won't be supported if they mess up, or they feel like they won't be physically or emotionally safe in our hallways, or our classrooms, or cafeterias? So that's the question for us that we're taking on. If we know the science of learning and development, how can that be used to help us shape the learning environment that students are in? And so the science of learning and development tells us how to change the odds so every student can fulfill our potential. We don't just want to lift up the individual stories of students who have managed to beat the odds. That is an amazing accomplishment for that individual child. However, if those odds remain, then the burden remains squarely on the shoulder of the child to overcome that challenge. And so for us, we ask ourselves, how can we actually change the odds so that a young person walking into our building, in that picture that you saw, is likely to succeed no matter the backpack of experiences that they've brought into our school? And so that's the question that we're trying to unpack. And so the science of learning and development tells us 5 key concepts. The first one is that development is bidirectional. So believe it or not, when you thought back to that amazing experience that you had with a teacher as a young person, the science of learning and development tells us that your teacher was actually developing in response to their experience with you too. That learning contexts are bidirectional. There's not just one person who has all the knowledge and all the learning, and they impart that on someone else. That this is a bidirectional, relationship-oriented thing. And so that's really important for us to think about as adults and to keep open our own learning and development pathway as well. The second is that context matters. And we talked about that a little bit, that learning environment, that context around us. And we'll talk about some of the brain science in a moment about that context. The third is that pathways are unique. We don't have a linear learning curve or line that we go through in our lives. It's actually more jagged. And if you're curious about learning more about this, there's a wonderful book called The End of Average by Todd Rose, where he gets into a lot of the details of how our learning trajectories are jagged. The fourth one is that learning is integrated. We are never just thinking academically or socially or emotionally. We are thinking always in an integrated way. Our brains and our bodies are constantly managing and navigating all 3 of those concepts at the same time. So we never just put our academic hat on and put all of our other things to the side. We are constantly having our brain and our body integrate social, emotional, and academics. And so the learning experiences that our young people have need to model that science of learning and development concept. And last, but certainly not least, student voice is critical. And the development of student agency for students to be able to flourish and thrive outside of our presence is so important for them to be able to have lifelong success. And the science tells us that. So that's the 5th key component of the science of learning and development. So going back to that idea of context that we started off with, that ability that we as adults can really control around us. One of the key science concepts that we really ground ourselves on is that there's about 20,000 genes that make up our human genome. There's not a lot of huge variance amongst each of us. And the science tells us that fewer than 10% of those actually get expressed over the course of our lives. So the question then becomes, what decides what of that gets expressed? What decides that 10%? And the answer is context. So the environment that we're in, the experiences that we have, the relationships that we have, all of those things can help decide what gets activated within inside us. And so our development happens along a continuum. And that continuum starts in birth through 6 years old, through 14 years old, and beyond. And for those of you who are early childhood fans, you know that the brain development happens at its strongest level in those first 3 years. However, what folks don't often know is that the place of second most development is during adolescence, over the course of your whole 50, 60, 70, 80 years of life. So there's a huge opportunity in adolescence. So what you see here is neuroplasticity, and that means that the brain is constantly shaping and changing and evolving over the course of our lives. We start off in birth, and I have a 2-year-old, and so I'm experiencing this in real time. And that 2-year-old is developing and having new neural pathways develop and form in her brain. She's having dendrites and all sorts of amazing things get denser and denser inside her brain as she experiences more things in life. And so over the course of those first 6 years, there's a lot of density that happens. And those neural pathways get more connected. They also get more tightly wound and denser. And so all of that happens in those first 6 years of life. Now, what you notice here is that between the ages of 6 and 14 and for the rest of your life, you'll notice a few things. One, it looks a little less dense. And so what happens is that there's a process called pruning and proliferation, meaning that we start to decide what we want to keep from our experiences because they were really valuable and important to us, and what we can just kind of let go because we are taking in so many new things. And so that's really what the science of learning and development tells us about neuroplasticity in those early years. So the question for us becomes, what are our young people keeping and what are they letting go of? And so you can imagine a young person who has experienced a trusting, safe, predictable environment might hang on to ideas about adults being trustworthy, or they might be more likely to develop a relationship with their teacher that first day of school without worrying about that adult relationship. They might lean into new activities because they have a lot of experiences of being supported when they're taking risks and trying new things in their own life. And so they might show up as just a natural learner, even in preschool. But the reality is that it is the environment that they've been in, the experiences and the relationships they've had that activate the parts of their genetic makeup that allow them to show up that way. And so sometimes we as educators even gravitate towards those narratives about, oh, they're just a natural learner, or they're naturally independent, when in fact this is really tied to the learning experiences that they've had even in the first 3 years of their lives. So you can imagine another scenario where a student has experienced lots of stress and adversity, and it is actually a safety and protective mechanism for them to be wary of their surroundings, for them to be cautious about new relationships, particularly with adults. And so you can imagine how they might show up on the first day of school. And so this evolution that we have over the course of our lives is so important for us to think about as educators, because we can create the learning context in our schools and classrooms. We can decide what that context is like in our buildings. And so that's the charge that we have as educators in DCPS as we become that whole child-centered anti-racist school system. And so as we lean on this science to think about what's actually going on inside the brain, there's a couple key centers to the brain that are really important. The first one is called the amygdala, because the amygdala is in charge of keeping us safe. It's the smoke signal to the brain. Essentially, if we are experiencing a stressful or adverse thing, the amygdala both remembers that for the rest of your life to keep you safe, to not let that thing happen again, or to warn you if it thinks it's going to happen again, and to then take control of your brain and your body, and to essentially say, hey, I'm in charge, I need to keep us safe. So while the amygdala is amazing at identifying things that could be a potential threat, it is terrible at differentiating a real threat from a not so real threat. And so when a child has experienced significant stress and adversity, they might have lots of warning signs that are there to keep them safe. And the amygdala might just regularly be in charge because of that hypervigilance. And again, that is very healthy for a child to have in certain circumstances. It can be a real challenge in the hallways of a school or a classroom that doesn't feel physically and emotionally safe for a young person. So this is important because it helps us understand how stress and adversity affects a developing brain. But it's also important because of the other parts of the brain that it affects. So the hippocampus is the part of the brain in charge of learning and memory. It's in charge of PARCC scores and all the other ways that students can show out and share their learning based on what they've done so far. However, the hippocampus and the amygdala are interconnected. So when the amygdala decides we're in an unsafe setting and I need to take over, the amygdala then tells the hippocampus it's not your time to shine. Essentially, stand down. I need to be in control here. It's important for us to stay safe, and I don't need any of that learning and memory to take place right now. I need to keep us safe. I need us to be reactive, and so we'll save the learning experiences for later. And so that's really important because it helps us understand both that it's really challenging for deep learning to take root if a student has experienced stress. And if a student isn't feeling calm, safe, and supported in the moment, that hippocampus won't be as available and accessible for learning and memory. It also is important for parents to know too, that in those moments of stress that your child might be experiencing, they may not actually remember what they just said and did. And so I know that I always think, sometimes when my daughter Quinn is doing something, I think, what did you do? Why are you doing this? Well, if she was experiencing a lot of stress, or if she wasn't feeling safe for some reason, she might not have exactly remembered what she just said or did. That takes me back to my middle school teaching years when I would say, why did you just say that? Why did you just do that? And they say, I didn't say that. And we would get into this back and forth before I knew the science that they may actually not have remembered what they just did. The other part of the brain that's so important in learning and development is the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain in charge of executive function, self-regulation, and attention. And it also is told to stand down when moments of stress. And so if you are experiencing stress and adversity, you are not able to pay attention as well. You're not able to remember where your backpack is. You're not able to self-regulate and manage your own stress. And so it's so important for us to see these connections, for us to understand the type of learning environment that we can create for students to thrive. So all of this is a part of our whole child approach. And what we mean when we say a whole child approach is an approach that pays attention to all the different parts of a child, that we are acknowledging and responding to the overall learning and development needs that a young person has, and that we are creating a context in which they can be supported and in which they can thrive. And so that sequence of practices that you see on the right there, from shared environments full of predictable expectations and norms and culturally affirming and sustaining practices, and those core relationships and trust building interactions that we just talked about, all help foster and support knowledge, skill, and mindset building. So all these things work together in the approach that we are doing. And we by no means have done this already. This is where we are going. We know that there's so much time and learning and capacity building of our own educators. Some are doing amazing work already, but we know we have a lot more room to grow. And so that's our work moving forward as we think about becoming this whole child-centered anti-racist school system. And so this is our first moment to kind of pause and reflect as a parent or a family member. Think about your own child and think about what it might mean for your child to go to school in a system that supported your whole child. The experiences that they were going through, the stress that they might be experiencing, the amazing learning opportunities that they might experience, how they respond socially and emotionally and academically, all of these things, if they were known, seen, and heard. What might it mean for you as a parent, as a family, for your child, if you knew that their whole child would be supported in that way? So feel free to send us a note, ask a question, let us know what it might mean for you if your whole child was supported. So we'll pause here for about 30 or 45 seconds to give you an opportunity to just reflect, let it sink in, and send us a note if you want.
Mike, I'm reminded to our conversation last week while folks send in some reflections that we had with the Parent Advisory Board. And I really appreciated folks naming how it would mean that they went to a school or in a system where their students got to learn about the different aspects of themselves, that early on they got exposure to the arts, the sciences in a deeper way, that they got to help uncover some of those passions. And like you, I have a little one, and those are the same things I want too. And even thinking about daycare and how you find that, that's really, it just, this question resonates with me. And I think each time we ask it, when I look at the feedback, I'm struck by that.
Yeah, and we have a long way to go in this work to really truly make this real. This is not necessarily how all teachers were trained and prepared. Some of this science is new about how the brain and the body respond in this way. And so we're all on our own learning trajectory, but what we're here to do today is to share with you our vision of where we're going and what the science tells us will unlock the full potential of every single one of our young people. And we know that some of these experiences that Paige was mentioning, whether it's the arts or drama or dance or sports or extracurricular activities, they can also unlock parts of our own learning and development as well that can be really relevant for academics. And so part of seeing the whole child is not siphoning off academics from every other experience that someone is having, but to really understand how social, emotional, and academics all fit together. And so that's this whole child perspective. And seeing some great thoughts come in, both about what we aspirationally want to do and help and support schools ask these questions, and also love that idea that my child would feel so much love. And one last riff on the science here before I kick it to Paige, but that love that child would feel is the hormone oxytocin. And oxytocin is so powerful that it overcomes and overpowers the stress hormone cortisol. So we know that if we have experienced a particularly stressful moment and we go to the person in our lives that helps us feel calm, safe, supported, we actually feel that tension and that stress reduce. And that is because we are getting huge hits of oxytocin coming our way. And the other piece of that happens when we feel that oxytocin, the amygdala is no longer in charge, and our hippocampus is wide open and available for learning and memory. So that's the impact of feeling that love, that safe and support in a school, the safety and support in a school. It means that all the other parts of our brain that we want to take advantage of are wide open and available. So that's the whole child part that we're really focusing on. As Paige mentioned too, a whole child approach is not truly a whole child approach unless we are speaking to the racialized experiences that young people have. We know that students are experiencing stress because of the experiences that they've had due to their race, and that some of our students are still even experiencing racism. And we know the impact that can have on a young person. We just heard about that the other night when we were talking to that group of parents that Paige mentioned as well. And we know the impact that can have on learning. So that's why we're committed to this work, because we know we can't fulfill the potential of every single young person without doing this integrated work. So I'll kick it over to Paige to take our next bend in our session tonight.
Thank you, Mike. And so I would love to re-ground us as we go to the next slide in our equity definition, because we view this journey to becoming a whole child anti-racist school district as a deepening of the equity work that we began in 2018. And there are three things that I want to really call your attention to in our equity definition that you see in front of you. The first is that it acknowledges the importance of environment. And I see that so often in our chat, is that this is really the place where our students would feel loved, they would feel seen, they would feel heard, they'd feel welcome and supported, whether it's in relationships with teachers or peers. And that's really foundational. Another thing that I want to acknowledge here is that it explicitly mentions students of color as a priority. It isolates race because we understand that that's a fundamental aspect of our children's identity and our identity as we navigate this world, and we cannot ignore that. And it's important that our equity definition acknowledges it. The third component that I want to call your attention to here is that it acknowledges the fact that equity is not about giving everyone the same thing. It's really about offering the most support where the greatest disparities have persisted. And when we think about advancing equity and anti-racism, it really means that we look at our data and we identify those needs and where those disparities are. And then we really take a comprehensive and adaptive approach to look at our policies and procedures, to look at the identity and mindsets, to really examine practices, and to acknowledge the historical and current culture and context before we move forward. We could go to the next slide. I think sometimes when we begin these conversations, we think, well, like, whose work is it? When we talk about equity, who's the one who's responsible? And sometimes I think the Spider-Man meme sums it up, that sometimes it can feel like we're all pointing our fingers at each other. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is work that we all have to live into. It's work that we all have to live and breathe on a daily basis. It's not about the work of one person or another. It's regardless of title, position. We are, as cheesy as it sounds, we're the change we want to see. We all have to take on individual actions to build that collective environment that we want our students to experience. And so becoming a whole child-centered anti-racist school district means that we have shared responsibility. We recognize we're in relationship with each other, and we're each going to be called to lean in and to really think about how we build the school district where all of our students feel that love. If we can go to the next slide. I want to pause here, and I'm going to ask you to grab a pen and a paper, or to open up a blank spot on in a Word document or something, because I want to center us on the why for this work. So we have 4 questions that we want to answer with you, and you will see on the right side some student groups. And so you'll look at the question and drop in the student group that you think answers the question. And so for the first question, blank reported lowest levels of school satisfaction in the 2019 Panorama survey. So take a second as we think about our different student groups that we see represented. What group do we think answers that question? As we move on to the second question, this one we're going to ask for there are going to be 2 different student groups that you can note in here. There are 0 blank and 0 and blank in DC's Juvenile Detention Center. There are 0 blank and blank in DC's Juvenile Detention Center. Which 2 student groups do you think are not represented in DC's Juvenile Detention Center? Now moving on to our third question. In DC, blank have more than double the rate of suicidal behaviors than their peers. For what student group do we think that's a reality? And lastly, in DCPS, 81% of students in self-contained programs within special education are blank. What student group do we think represents 81% of our students in self-contained programs? All right, if we transition to the next slide, I want to share some of the answers to this, because this is the why for our work. Black students reported the lowest level of school satisfaction in our 2019 Panorama survey. When we go to the next question, we found that there are 0 Asian students and 0 white students in DC's Juvenile Detention Center. Looking at our third question, in DC, LGBTQIA+ students have more than double the rate of suicidal behaviors than their peers. And for our fourth, in DCPS, 81% of students in self-contained programs are Black students. This is the why for our work. This is why this work cannot live with just one person. It cannot live in one department. It cannot live in just one school or with one race. This is the collective work of everyone in this district, all the members of our community. And so, like Mike, I would love to do an equity pause with you all and really think about how to dig into what this work means for your school. What does eliminating opportunity gaps mean for your school? What would it mean for your child if we were to eliminate opportunity gaps? I think a lot about the slide that Mike opened up when I think about my own experience in DCPS. I had the pleasure of going to Bunker Hill Elementary School. And when I look at our graduation data, when I look at the persistence in college, which is not something that we had when I was graduating from high school, I recognize that, you know, I was one of those students who was lucky enough to beat the odds, but that it shouldn't be about luck or about beating the odds, right? Eliminating opportunity gaps would mean that it wouldn't be luck. It would be something that we take for granted. And so would love any thoughts that folks have here that they want to share. Or even if you're not there, if you want to just reflect though on what it would look like for you to build this school district with us, we'd appreciate that too. I see a question in the chat that came through, which was, are schools doing this work too with you? And yes, I think that it has been, Mike, if you want to share a little bit about how you answered that question.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we know that we need to be able to support schools in doing this work and ourselves in central services. We know that everybody has their own learning journey on all of this work. So this is not just something to the Spider-Man slide that just schools need to solve on their own. We need to do this ourselves as well. And so we prioritize this work. Paige and I and our teams were doing sessions at Summer Leadership Institute with all of our school leaders. I think there was 800 or so on the first day. At Leadership Academy, this whole year, we were going to be prioritizing this work. And for teachers, we are offering a WholeChild Teacher Academy that many of our amazing school educators are doing with us this year too. So like I said, we have a long way to go, and we're excited to see this work sprout up and live in our schools. And then there's so many places where it's already doing that.
I see another some feedback from a parent that this would look like unlimited before and after care Saturdays and teachers who would go beyond the work hours. Mike, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I know the importance of before and after care with my 2-year-old. Paige and I are often texting about on our way to pick up or drop off or whatever. So I totally feel that. And I know that there are so many teachers who go above and beyond every single day, and we are inspired by the work that they're doing, especially during these challenging times. And I know that we'll get to a place where every single school and every single student will feel supported in this way, hopefully soon.
And I love another example too that just came through, which is more tutors and exposure for students. One of the families that we spoke to said that they would love to expose their child to everything that even our nation's capital has, but honestly means sometimes stands in the way of that. And if we could think creatively about how to use time during the day, how to provide those extracurricular opportunities, we would get them closer to not only eliminating opportunity gaps, but to also creating that environment where the whole child could thrive.
Yeah, and I saw another post about having more Black and brown teachers to lift up my son's potential. And that is so important for our young people to see themselves in educators, to see themselves in their environment. So we talk about having culturally affirming and sustaining practices. That's not just in what they learn about, what they see on the walls, but who's in front of them, who they see as their mentors, their educators, the people in their lives. And there's powerful data about this too, showing the impact that that can have if you've experienced that as a young person.
Oh, I love this next one too. Lots of hard work and community building, easier said than done. And I agree with it. And I think that we recognize that doing this work without community is impossible. Like families, our community partners, our ANCs, like alumni of schools, all these folks really have to be at the table when we're beginning this, and honestly to sustain it. And so that's why I also get so excited about it, because I think that then we really get ourselves closer to what we all have in our head and these visions, when we really ensure that everyone sees themselves at the table and has a chance to be a part of the vision for their school community. I appreciate you all's engagement, and I want to move us to the next portion. So Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome. So all of this helps us reground in where we are now in this trajectory of where we need to go. And it was great to see so many of you in the chat saying that this is important. I hope our schools are talking about it. And so our story is one that both has a lot of progress and a lot of room to grow. The Council of Great Cities Schools, which is the organization that has all of the major urban school districts, just reaffirmed that over the past decade, DCPS is the fastest improving major district in the country compared to expected growth. So that means it factored in demographic change, all sorts of factors, and showed that DCPS is the fastest improving district in the country. And that's not only in 4th grade math, but that's also in 8th grade math, in 4th grade English language arts, and in 8th grade English language arts, in every major subject across the board. So that's really exciting progress that we've made over the last decade plus. And all of that work has come from amazing reform efforts that we've done so far. And so this is just a small snapshot of them. But way back in 2008, we started universal preschool and the trajectory towards offering preschool to 3- and 4-year-olds. We started our teacher and leader evaluation system and impact to make sure that we were having high standards and that folks were supported in their growth and getting feedback. We launched our Common Core standards and our curriculum in 2010. And we started our rigorous home visiting program in 2011, where we're taking a real serious approach to community engagement. So we have done so many things, from Cornerstones to LEAP, which is our professional development series for teachers. And recently we've prioritized social emotional learning and our equity framework. And then in this past year, we started DCPS Persists to help students, once they've gone beyond high school graduation, to try and to thrive and flourish in college and beyond. And so all of this has gotten us far, but now we're saying that the science of learning and development tells us we need to take a whole child approach. And if we are to eliminate the opportunity gaps that Paige mentioned, we must become a whole child-centered, anti-racist school system. And we are doing that through a multi-tiered system of support. And would love that to have you ask your schools about how they are supporting your students through that MTSS multi-tiered system of support work. So those are all of the reforms that we stand on the shoulders of and that have made significant progress getting to this moment. And yet, significant racial disparities remain. And that's the reality that we have right now. We've made a ton of progress, and yet we still have these significant disparities. So the question is, where do we go from here so that every child reaches their full potential? And that's the work that we're talking about tonight. And that's DCPS Becoming. And so this stands on the shoulders of the work that we've done over the last 5 years. Some of you may be familiar with the capital commitments that we have as part of our strategic plan. And so over the last 5 years, from 2017 to 2022, these were the capital commitments that we had made as a district. So obviously a lot has changed and evolved over the last 5 years, particularly the challenges over the last 2 years. And so these are our aspirational goals. And so we know that we want to make sure that we are taking the work that we're talking about on tonight before waiting for that next strategic plan. So that's DCPS Becoming. It is our effort to focus on becoming a whole child-centered anti-racist school system, and that's now. We didn't want to wait until the next strategic plan to include this or to add this. We wanted to do this work now because it's so important for us to do that. However, it's also helpful to know that beginning this winter and in the spring, there will be an opportunity for folks like you to weigh in on that next strategic planning process, to share the priorities that you have for your children. And so that'll be that next opportunity for us to have a strategic plan and to settle on the goals and the aspirations that we have moving forward. So hopefully this work will be a part of that, and we'd love to hear from all of you to advocate for the work that you think your children need as part of that process. So that's how we are getting to this moment of DCPS Becoming. And right now we are thinking of Becoming as a couple of different priorities. And the first one is public engagement. Getting a sense from folks like you, does this resonate? Is this what you want for your child? What would it mean for your whole child to be supported? What would it mean for opportunity gaps to be eliminated? What would be possible for your child if they felt safe, supported, and able to thrive? And the second priority is around training and capacity building. And I saw that someone in the chat had noted that teachers are working really hard and they need to be supported and developed and given their own learning trajectory as well. And that's the part that we're really excited about, giving teachers and school leaders and ourselves and central services the opportunity to become, as our Deputy Chancellor Melissa Kim says, human development experts. So that's our goal, that every single person at DCPS can carry that lens into the work that they're doing. And if we're able to build a capacity of people to do this work, then we can bake these into the systems that we have in place. So all those great things that I mentioned before, from impact to our curriculum and our content and the way that teachers are given feedback and supported, if all of those things don't have a whole child anti-racist approach woven into them, then this work won't really live in schools, and you'll all be asking those same questions that you did, like, I'm not seeing this work live in my school. I'm not seeing the environment be attended to. That's the work of systematizing this lens so that schools can really feel like they are given the capacity to prioritize this work and they're seeing it show up in all sorts of different places. And then ultimately, we want to see this work thrive. And that's our sprouts and proof points, that we want to see this work grow and pop up in all sorts of ways in our schools. And so that's what we are excited about doing, to see this work live. And I know that there are schools that are already prioritizing this work. We hear about it every day. That's what's exciting to us as well, not just thinking that this is new work that schools need to take on. And so this is our how for DCPS Becoming for right now. And hopefully over the next year in our strategic planning process, we will codify and firm up the details of how this work will live in our district for many years to come. And so I'm just seeing in the chat a few comments about having this conversation with other families at your school. I would love for that to happen. I know Paige and I and our teams would love to help and support folks in doing that. So please reach out to us. You have our email addresses here. Send us a note. Let us know how we can support this work in your schools. We have teams of folks that are supporting our schools directly. And so if there's anything that we can do to help this type of conversation happen and to build the momentum for this work as well, we'd love to hear that. Saw another question in the comments about feeling worried about how students will be separated further. Will students who come from challenging backgrounds or environments be labeled or separated? That is a really important question. And I think from my read on all the science of learning and development, the most important thing is that an individual child gets what they need. And that's what Paige was talking about earlier, that this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, that students have different levels of support and need that they have. But importantly, the science says that inclusion and belonging and having people feel connected, building relationships with each other, feeling a sense of community, all of those things are what unlocks potential. So this is also why we are really trying to prioritize alternatives to suspension, for example. If a student is struggling, that they're not just excluded from the learning environment, that that's actually the place where they need to learn more, where they need to connect with a supportive adult, a mentor, someone who can help them learn how to manage their stress, cope with the experiences that they're having. And so all of this work is about bringing us closer. The science tells us that when we have these deep relationships, when we feel a sense of belonging, that we are not feeling the stress and the adversity that we might be going through. And so love that question to speak to as well.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Mike, that I really appreciate the perspective that you bring, and when we talk about systematizing this and doing it intentionally, it's the recognition that done poorly, students, and Mike, you say this better than I do, but we risk problematizing students. When we talk about like systemic issues, we make the student the issue versus thinking about really what are the factors in the environment that are contributing to what we're seeing right now with students. How do we as adults need to think about our practices differently? How do we need to think about how we're showing up and supporting students in a different way so that all students can thrive?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so right now we're talking with schools about how they can make sure that when they're having conversations about supporting students, that they're first asking questions like, what is the strength of the relationship between the teacher and the student? What's the strength of the relationships between the student and their peers? Do they feel a sense of safety physically and emotionally in that classroom setting that we're looking at data on? Do they seem comfortable taking academic risks and trying new skills? And if the answer to any of those questions is no, it's kind of like a COVID check, then we have to attend to those first, because we know that that can mask learning that students have actually already done. And it can make it harder for them to learn and develop academically as well. And so us paying attention to the learning environment, the context around a learner, will help unlock that hippocampus and make sure that all of the deep, rich content work that our teachers are spending so much time thinking about and planning can actually be maximized and reach its full potential. So you're exactly right, Paige. We are trying to not problematize the child, but to think about what about the context around them might be an enabling or a limiting factor first, and then we can talk about the skill development that they can have socially, emotionally, and academically. So it's that context that we like to focus on. I know we have a little time for a few more questions, and want to bring back in Demelsa if you had any closing thoughts as well as we ask some questions and see if there's any more thoughts that folks have. I've loved the things that folks have put in there. Another really amazing, rich conversation with a group of parents and family members, just like last week. Can't wait for next week's one, even though I don't have one scheduled. But it is wonderful to hear what's on the minds of parents and families as we imagine prioritizing this work and hoping that it resonates with the vision for the type of school that you want your children to go to.
Thank you, Mike. I believe you covered the questions, most of the questions that we received in the chat. There are a couple coming in, so feel free to answer those in the chat, Mike, and I'll go ahead and get us started closing up. First, I want to thank you all for attending and being here. For those who pre-registered, I know we got a handful of questions regarding talking about race with your children. So right now in the comment section, or I guess on the Q&A, I'm adding a link to a past parent university that we did on having conversations around race with your children. This parent university took place about a year ago. So keep that in mind, and it's focused on talking to like the younger children about it. In the spring, we will have conversations around race. How do we talk to children about that? I know that our early childhood education folks are like cooking up something really exciting. So be on the lookout for that information. I also want to talk about a couple of the upcoming parent workshops that we have. We have one in mid-November. That's focused in on checking in on our social, emotional well-being and mental health. So that really connects to the conversation that we had now. As parents, what we can do is work with our children to make sure that we are providing that love and support and advocating for our children when we're not getting that. So this session will help you get some strategies for that. On the 30th, we have a session for our early learners, specifically advocating for your child, the what, when, and how of specialized education for early learners. So that's specifically for children in like early childhood. And then in early December, we have one specifically for middle school. As Mike mentioned, there's like so much brain growth happening during that time. So this session will really help ground us into making like next steps and plans for our middle schoolers as they consider what DCPS high schools they'll attend. We have a lot of content, as you can see by the link that I dropped in the chat. Please visit our YouTube channel. That's where all of our Parent University videos live. If you want to look at this video again or refer it to someone, that's where you can find it, and we'll have the recording in English and in Spanish. You can also follow us on social media. I try to put out as much information as I can and have on those channels. So if you want to stay abreast about what's going on with family engagement, that is where you can find that information. To close this out, I just want to go through a couple of like reminders and like wrapping up. First, oops, let me fix that. First, like I want to talk about completing a survey. So Jerry, could you please enter a survey link in the chat? We want to serve you the best we can, and the only way we can do that is by hearing from you. So we have implemented some of the feedback you have provided, and so please, please, please complete the survey. We want to do what works best for you. If you have any questions or any follow-up, you have Mike's and Paige's email. It was posted up there, but you can also email parentu k12.dc.gov, and we'll connect you with whoever you need to be connected with. And finally, just like check out our social media to stay up to date. Here's an infographic of a survey that we did. Oh, this is in Spanish. Okay, so there's an infographic of a session we did. It was bilingual. We received responses from like a lot of families, and so we want to tell you like what we heard, sort of like summarize what we heard from you, and then we want to like highlight some of the things that we're doing in response. And if you have any additional feedback on that, we're happy to receive that. Great. So that is all I have. Please feel free to complete that survey and stay in touch. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.